Welcome to our Lunch and Learn series, brought to you by the UAlbany Innovation Center and Innovate 518, New York's Capital Region Innovation Hotspot Program. We work together to support technology-driven startups in New York's Capital Region. Through the Innovation Hotspot Program, qualifying companies can operate tax-free for up to 5 years when they meet state criteria and are affiliated with a New York incubator. As a regional network, Innovate 518 brings together partner incubators so founders can access the right space, coaching, and community for their company. The UAlbany Innovation Center is a technology-focused physical incubator. In addition to the New York State tax incentive programs, we offer educational programming, networking, business coaching with entrepreneurs and residents, and connections to UAlbany researchers and students with strengths in climate and environmental science, biotech, forensics and cybersecurity, advanced data analytics, and nanotech/semiconductors. Inside the eTech building, UAlbany's hub for research and entrepreneurship, members get affordable rates starting at $150 per month, a bright, clean work environment with new furniture, meeting spaces, utilities, and access to community and culture found in an R1 academic institution. Don't forget to ask us about the NVIDIA supercomputer access for member companies. Across the river at UAlbany's Health Sciences campus, there's over 500,000 square feet of lab, office, and common space, alongside major industry neighbors like Regeneron and Curia. It's a flexible environment for life science startups to grow with wet lab space. If you'd like to get more involved, email innovationcenter@albany.edu or scan the QR code to connect with us. We're glad you're here. Enjoy today's session.
I am really pleased to have Chris Wessell with us. I've known Chris for over a decade. Chris is managing partner of PeopleWise and works not only with established organizations, but also works with and advises early stage startups. So it's great that he's able to come to this audience that we have and speak directly from experience. He's actively involved in the Capital Region's startup ecosystem. You'll often see him at networking events when you attend those. And Chris is an Albany alum and adjunct faculty at the Masry School of Business. So you'll find Chris teaching org behavior, HR, and possibly strategy. And he also brings a really practical, real-world perspective to everything leadership. So please join me in welcoming Chris.
I should note too, besides like working with companies where I've hired some of their first few employees, I've also been an entrepreneur myself for 17 years. The first business I started in 2009 was a technology staffing company, which I ran for about 10 years. It was called Pinnacle Recruiting. So started that with a partner, basically had like what happens to a lot of people where I was working for a big, huge company and then they had a layoff and we're like, oh, what are we going to do? And I'm like, all right, whatever, let's hang out a shingle. We got nothing to lose. And the first year we, the two of us, did pretty well. And then we said, okay, let's start adding people because we had people work with us at other companies. We're like, all right, we'll just start hiring people. And the first hire was kind of lucky because it just kind of worked out. The person, we meshed really well together. I was still figuring out my own leadership style. Then I started hiring more people. And I'm like, what's wrong with all these people? I realized that, not everybody is managed the same way. And I also realized that, at the time we were like, okay, there's us two, we know what we're doing, but we need help. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is like, well, what kind of help do you need? Sometimes we'll hire quickly just out of like, I just need a body, I need somebody, right? And I've done that. And then, later I kind of was able to have the luxury of kind of figuring out what I needed before I went to go look for it. And that can make a lot of difference. And even just structuring, onboarding, stuff that'll start to border on what Deb will talk about next month with HR. A lot of this, even larger existing established organizations don't give a lot of thought sometimes to before they hire what it is like you even need. And it's super critical. And even like how your role changes, like I had experienced that firsthand because, you had two people who knew how to do all parts of the business, just run it at the same speed. And now you need to integrate other people into it. You don't have a lot of bandwidth to train somebody. So you're trying to figure out how to make this person like effective while also not creating drag for yourself. So along the way, we started buying rental properties, which I was trying to manage those. Then we decided we're going to hire people to manage those properties and manage other properties. And we decided, let's have a property management business that'll give us more income for that. So that was a whole other thing. At one point, for a couple of years, I had a massage spa I'm not a massage therapist myself, but I used to go, well, I go to them often because I'm all tight. So one of them had expressed that she didn't like where she was working once the ownership changed. And I said, well, what could be involved in that? So I set it up in the RPI Tech Park. So as mentioned, my thought was like, oh, okay, we'll buy a couple rooms in there. I'll set them up. And I realized that once it worked fine, it ran really well for like a year. But then this person moved a little bit further away. And that's the type of business where it's very localized. Like no one's going to drive too far for like a massage, even if they really like the person. Same thing if your barber moves too far away, you'd be like, listen, sorry, but you're too far. Then all of a sudden had to get more hands-on in running that business and hiring massage therapists and all this other stuff. And I realized I had no business being in that business. So wrapped that up, did the second year. I had the opportunity to be a partner in a construction company that was building out cell towers during the 4G LTE upgrade. We had a bunch of stuff going on there. I had a very aggressive sales guy who was out there making projects happen, who would call me and say, hey, we got a crew working in Kentucky on a project out here for Ericsson, and they all got to get paid on Friday, and it's like Wednesday. And I'm like, we got a crew in Kentucky? So there was a lot of building plans while we were flying them. So that's just like, so I've not just like advised businesses, but like I've had to live a lot of it myself. So let's see, okay. So some of the stuff we'll go over today, and I'll try to keep an eye on time. I know Kelly will keep me reined in. Why that first hire is so different. Talking about like role definition and also some, compensation realities. Sometimes we have an idea of what we think could work, but then there's some like the market realities. Where you actually get early stage talent from, it's not typically the same sources that you get, when you're at a mature stage. A little bit of interviewing basics, because some of the things I'm going to talk about with the role definition is the attributes that you're going to want in early employees, no matter what their role is. It's different than when it's a mature operation. Like you're going to want different attributes, no matter what their job is, that are going to make sense, and they're going to be able to run with you, and they're going to be able to keep up, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you would ask and like listen for that could give you a clue as to whether or not you're talking to that kind of person. Because sometimes we think, oh, let's hire that person that came from this giant company that does the same stuff I'm trying to do. But then that person's like handcuffed because they only know an environment where there's all this structure already and there's resources, and they don't know that their ability to, their bias to action isn't necessarily there. Their ability to operate in like ambiguous circumstances isn't there. Right. And then, kind of what comes after that, which, again, Deb will talk about like once they work for you, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you got to think about, but we'll start here. So up until the point where you're now hiring somebody, like you've decided and executed, you just did it, whether it's you by yourself or like with me and the partner I had, we like shared a brain, which for better or worse, if we both made a bad decision, that's the one thing we were going to do. But if we pretty much agreed on most things. Initially, as a 10-year run, one of the things you'll find out too, when we'll talk about like equity and partners, is partnerships evolve or devolve over time too. So just be thoughtful about who you hitch your wagon to. But your role is going to start to change. That's the other thing you'll think about. Like I was doing all of it, right? And the way I would just describe it is like when you hire new people, you're carving out pieces of yourself. And then that's a whole other job. Right. And now you're figuring out like, hey, but how does that change my role? Does this free me up now? Like, what is my job now? One of the exercises I go through with a company when they're hiring some of their first employees is like, okay, they'll whip up a job description for what they want someone to do. Easy. What's your job description now? What's your job now? That's not always clear. And that's how sometimes founders don't get out of the way, because they don't rescope like what their own job is, and they're still kind of trying to do some of the stuff that they're trying to give this other person to do, and they're almost and you need that clarity yourself. So your role starts to change. There's less people in your company at this point, so every hire represents a bigger part of your team. Hiring mistakes are expensive, but it's not just the money you burned, it's the opportunity cost, it's the momentum that you lost, it's the distraction. If you brought in the wrong kind of person, and anybody that you hire, you're going to invest a lot of effort into, hopefully. Well, you should anyway. If that effort isn't rewarded, like you're kind of sidetracked, right? Like there's opportunity costs of other stuff you could have been doing. Now these things, you can't completely avoid these mistakes, even with the best intentions and the best kind of structure. Like you're still going to make bad hires, but you're just trying to like mitigate this, right? And just be aware of what's coming up. And of course, like the early hires, they shape your culture, whether you realize it or not, like, because like these initial people are like, you're forming your company culture, whether you're aware of it or not. And please, at any point, like interrupt me if you have like a question, something you're unclear on, something you vehemently disagree with, that's fine too. A lot of first time mistakes, and sometimes this is not just first hires, but hires in general. Sometimes we hire quick just because there's pain. We need someone who can do this. And like, I just want to get this off my plate. So we hire too quick just because we're under pressure. Sometimes you want to hire what you call a utility player, someone who can do a lot of different things, a Swiss Army knife, whatever. And that's great. But if you don't have like clear like goals and outcomes for what their job is supposed to be, it can be frustrating for both of you. Like, hey, I've hired this person who's been in the industry for a while. They've done a lot of different things. They'll be super useful. They can do this, they can do that. They're like another me. That's fine, but like they're not you. They're an employee. They're looking still for some direction. They're not an owner, right? So they need clarity on like, okay, I can be a Swiss Army knife. I can jump in and flex and do other stuff you need to, but like what's my goal? Like what's my job? How are you going to measure performance? How do I know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, right? Hiring someone just like you, that is a terrible idea. And I have done it myself because like, I remember my partner and I at the time in that first business, I remember I use a fair amount of behavioral assessment type tools with a lot of my clients, and a lot of them are really good. Some of them are different. Some of them are better at some things than others. A lot of them are poorly applied. And let me give you a perfect example of poorly applying one. So we all took like DISC assessments, right? Which are great. They're really informative. We didn't use them right though. We said, okay, the two of us are like same thing, right? Let's hire that. That's really what we did too. Like I'm gonna hire a team that's like everybody who's like wired like us. Not really a good idea, right? Because I already said, like, if the two of us made some boneheaded mistake, there was no checks and balances, right? So we needed, like, and I had this conversation once with, I hired the first controller, not quite CFO, but basically controller for a company out in Rochester, working out of the Kodak buildings there. They were making flexible solar panels, and they were like about 20 some employees. At that point, the accounting was being handled by someone from one of the board members' companies. And it really got to the point where like, we need a full-time person in charge of finance and accounting here. So where this ties in was we did the behavioral assessments. I used predictive index for this, and I have them basically do a job target of like what they're looking for, the attributes in this person. And it was 3 scientists that were all like very like entrepreneurial, right? The pattern that they mapped out for this controller was the same thing as them. And I'm like, okay, so now if I just took that at face value and ran with that, that would have been problematic. But I was like, all right, guys, let me ask you this. Like, this person's like, you guys are all very like risk tolerant and very like quick to act and don't need a lot of information to like make decisions and so forth. Is that what you really want in your person who's in charge of accounting and finance? Or do you want like a counter, right? So you want something that complements, right? Sometimes you do want like another you in certain roles, perhaps, but it's a terrible idea to just try to hire more of you, right? Sometimes you hire too junior to save money, which I get. I can appreciate that. I've been super broke plenty of times, or at least at a minimum cash flow impacted, right? Where you're like, oh, I got piles of invoices and that's all fine and good, but you don't have enough money in the bank to pay the cell phone bill. And then meanwhile, you're like a week away from like a giant check, right? So I get the saving money. And it's not that hiring junior is a bad idea, but if the main goal is to save money, like if you put too much weight on that and you're trying to just go with the cheapest possible option, it's going to be limiting. The flip side is going too senior or like this magic bullet. And I see this happen all the time in hiring where they're like, oh, this person is like this white knight. We're going to pay, they want 200K, but totally be worth it. We'll make it up, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that works. Most of the time it doesn't. Kelly, so I know you've probably met some of those, right? And sometimes somebody comes in and, sells a nice bag of goods of like, hey, I've been here, I can help you out, God, hire me and you'll make tons of money, right? And that doesn't usually play out that way. And then with writing a job description for defining the problem, right? So this happens a lot, organizations a lot, is you have to think about the underlying business problem before you write a job description, right? You can't just be like, I think we need a X, right? And then because you're trying to round out an org chart, you're basing it on the last company you worked at or somebody's advice, you need to hire an executive assistant, you need to hire a controller, you need to hire a salesperson, whatever. Okay, cool. Don't start fleshing out that job description because you're getting ahead of yourself. Like, think about the underlying business need that's driving that hire in the first place and use that as a guide. And it sounds like that would make sense, but it's not always how it happens. And you're starting with like the problem, though, that does say the person. Start with the problem, not the person. I say not the person because like sometimes we'll meet someone, we're like, oh, we need them on our team. We're going to figure this out. We're going to make it work. We're going to make a position for them. That can work out, but you have to be thinking about like what it is you want that person to do. I've done it. A lot of people have done it. Like where you're like, oh, I need this person that's going to be a key part of our success, this individual. You want to back up and think about like, okay, what's the actual business need? Like, what's the problem? One of the first things you want to think about in your position is like, what needs to come off my plate? Where's my time best spent, right? A lot of times when you start up a business, a lot of business owners are reluctant salespeople. A lot of them don't realize that like if you start a business, like you are pretty much going to be the rainmaker. Like you have to be the salesperson. No one's gonna be able to sell it like you. No one understands it like you. Sometimes you think like, I remember I started hiring junior sales reps to save money, back to a previous slide. And I had a mentor in a business peer group who was like, why are you wasting your time on these like, you know, just out of college kids, you're trying to have set appointments for you. Like you should be the one going on those meetings. Like you're the salesperson. Hire, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't hire salespeople, but like in this case, it was like, okay, you should be the one talking to customers, hire delivery behind you, right? And that's not going to be the path for everyone. It depends on what your strengths are. Some people are like real strong product people, and maybe you're better suited to be kind of like a sales engineer. Maybe it makes sense to hire somebody who can open doors, and then you're the closer. But like where is your time best spent? That's going to drive like what needs to come off your plate. Not just the stuff that annoys you, that's stuff that you don't want to do, but like what are the high value activities that like really only you can do? And believe me, I've been there. I think I needed to do everything. I was the only one who knew how to do any of this stuff right. There's plenty of people who figured out how to have a business like mine, right? Like I had to learn that. And I'd say, okay, there are some unique things that I could bring. And then all the other stuff, someone else could do if you stop and think about it. So thinking about like defining this role and figuring out how to set this person up for success, their authority's got to match their responsibility. This disconnect happens a lot in organizations. So it's like, I want to nip it in the bud here when you're hiring your first people. A lot of people are accountable for a variety of things and may not have the authority to actually do anything about them. Anybody who's worked in a decent sized organization has probably felt that, where you're kind of, especially like middle management, you have all sorts of responsibility. You have very little ability to make changes that would actually help that accountability. You were in healthcare practice management. I'm sure you had stuff that, I'm not trying to peck on you, but I'm sure you had stuff, because I know the type of work you're in that you were responsible for, but you didn't really, I can't just let this person go or change this. You had limited authority probably. And that varies, and you see it in all sorts of companies, but the more you can try to do that right from the start, the better, right? So if you're trying to put someone in charge of something and have them accountable for it, like give them the autonomy and authority to actually make those decisions. Now I'm saying that as someone who also had a hard time doing that themselves. So I get it's not easy because this is your baby. You grew this, you still feel like you are the best person to do this, but I'll let go. Clear success metrics are super important. And again, a lot of these apply to any role, not just a first hire. You got to be clear about like, what is it that we want to do here? You might meet a fellow like founder or whatever, or someone else you know from your network, which is where a lot of early hires start. You sit down, you have a couple of drinks, you meet up for coffee a couple of times. It makes sense. You want to work together. I can do this. You can do this. Let's go. And a lot of times we don't stop and think about like, okay, let's look at like, what does success look like? How will we know we did a good job? What is it you want me to do? What will you be doing? The clearer you are on that, and you don't need a ton of different metrics. You could also have a handful of KPIs, like a few is actually much better, right? And then vague roles, you get mismatched expectations. Like where does like most disagreement and conflict come from? It comes from misaligned expectations, right? So personal life, business, whatever, somebody thought something was supposed to be one way, someone else thought it was supposed to be the other way, conflict, right? So like you want to try to avoid that by not having this kind of vague job. And there's kind of two types of hires, especially at early stages. You've got delegation hires and you've got leverage hires. And that's not exact specific textbook terms for them. It's just the way I would describe them. One is handing off tasks. That's where your job doesn't really change much. You just have someone kind of extending you, maybe taking some of the juice off your plate, use like an executive assistant from like locally or overseas or whatever. And then leverage hire would be like we were talking about, fundamentally changing like what your job is. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. The fractional versus full-time question. So fractional is really good if the problem is like narrow or time bound, right? Like it's not going to be an ongoing thing. This is something that's like pretty specific in nature. It's a specific project. I need a specific type of expertise. This is also expertise needed more than availability. So think about, we need someone who has like, especially in your early stages, you might have like a fractional CFO type of leadership, right? Like I had that where at one point, in the 10 years we were there, we were 1 to 3 million each year, like somewhere probably average about like close to 2 each year. So it was a fair amount of transactions. And, we were running off of QuickBooks, which, listen, I've seen companies pushing 50 million. They were like, we're just got off of QuickBooks. I'm like, oh my God. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was we had a part-time bookkeeper who just came in because we didn't have not in a very transaction heavy business. So we had someone come in periodically, do journal entries, but like, my partner and I, both being graduates of business school, figured like, okay, we know enough about this that like that should go under that and that should be that. And, that doesn't always go exactly the way it's supposed to. So you actually, at a certain point, you realize you need like CFO leadership. You need somebody who can look at like budgeting, forecasting, someone that can look at like financing structures, somebody that can look at like the real CFO work. And you're nowhere near even affording a full-time bookkeeper, much less CFO. That's when you have like very specific expertise, and the availability is honestly, you meet with them like once a month, right? You don't need them to be like available frequently. So that works. Fractional Deb, who's going to be here in a month. She does fractional HR, right? Like she is that person where in a small company, they don't necessarily need a full-time HR person. And she's just there when you need her, or she might have like be there, some companies she's there like 1 day a week, 1 or 2 days a week. Other ones, they're kind of like, they got it covered because they have a good HR person. And she's just like, call me if stuff goes sideways. So that's when fractional really works. Full-time, or at least more permanent in nature. Maybe it's not 40 hours a week, maybe it's 30 hours a week, whatever it is. But let's say like that real like full-time employee. This is when you want a little more control. Right. This is when you want them dedicating more of their time to you. This is when you want them more available. Right. And you're not going to get that with fractional because they'll be available, but they have other clients. Right. This is when you need more commitment. This is when the role might evolve. Right. Like this is pretty defined typically. It can evolve a little and they can adjust their service level agreement. But this is when you're like, okay, I'm going to hire this person. We define that this is going to be their job, but that's going to change over time. And I want them like as a committed resource. Right. And then what I call the mythical long-term part-timer, 22 years of hiring for companies. And I've heard, I don't know how many thousands of times, like, oh, we just find someone who could come in like, a few hours a day, maybe like a stay-at-home mom or something like that. And that would be great. And they're thinking, oh, this will like keep costs down. And I could just have like, we won't have to pay a ton and it'll keep our exposure low and they'll love it. It'll work for them. But they're also assuming that there's a situation that works for. I can tell you, I've seen that actually happen like maybe twice in like 20 plus years. Most of the time, there's just thought is there's like, oh, that's out here. It's kind of like if you imagine like a certain type of house, but it's not around here, so it doesn't really matter, right? So there's this, oh, I'm going to have somebody work part-time for us forever. Part-time help is fine, not fractional, but like part-time, but it's usually finite in nature. Usually it's someone that is going to work for you part-time for as long as it works for them, right? Not as long as it works for you. A fractional resource would be usually a specific type of expertise, because the terms could get conflated, right? Because so this would be like an actual employee, right? That's working for you just 10, 12, 20, whatever, limited number of hours a week, but they're filling a particular function like regularly within. And then this would be more like kind of hired gun expertise in like certain areas where you just need to kind of tap into somebody that if you would not be able to, there's no business case to be able to hire them full time, right? I'm not saying don't do it, but sometimes we go too junior or we don't think about other factors and we're mainly thinking about just saving money. Yeah. So I'm not advocating for not hiring. Like what you have to do is you have to try to strike a balance, and some of that will come from like defining the role and really understanding like, okay, how junior can we go, and still like what should we be looking for in the interview process? What should we figure out like what they do have that we can build on versus just, this person right out of school versus that person right out of school, two different sets of experiences, even if they're both just right out of school, right? On the surface, they both just got their MBA or whatever, but they have wildly different backgrounds. So sometimes we'll get like blinders of like, oh, we'll just hire someone like right out of college or right out of an MBA program, but that's too like narrow in thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Fractional is typically going to be a vendor. Yeah. I mean, you might have a rare occasion where somebody is kind of working for you part-time with their fractional resource. Most of the time, they're going to be set up as a business and billing you as such. Plus, the other thing is you want to avoid that whole independent contractor stuff. And like one of the ways to like, and Deb will elaborate a lot on HR law. I'll just touch on it. But sometimes we're like, oh, I'm going to hire this person, I'm just going to pay them hourly, right? And there's a litmus test they have to meet in order to technically be an independent contractor. And one of them is they have more than one client. And also they can kind of define when they work, as opposed to the part-time employee who you set like what their hours are. More often than not, in my experience, the fractional resource, especially because they tend to be like a very specific technical resource of some kind, usually has like a business setup, and they're usually billing you. And they have like an LLC or something. That makes sense. All right, we all love this question. I knew we were going to talk about this. So why do we think about like, okay, can I pay them in equity? Can I pay them all commission? And I get it because I've been there. Why do we think about it? Okay, cash is always tight, even if you have, again, like at times, like what my weekly payroll was and my monthly billings, like I was always paying payroll much more frequently than my invoices were coming in. And there was just, and you had to leverage things like credit lines and factoring invoices and stuff like that to balance out cash flow issues. But cash is always tight no matter what, right? You're having like a fixed payroll, like a fixed overhead to meet, right? Like not only is cash tight, but you're like, okay, how much overhead do I want to add? Like, how can I avoid some overhead? Maybe I could pay commission, maybe I could do equity, whatever. And also like advice from peers, online content, all sorts of TikTok advice, right? And it's funny because I always chuckle when I see like different reels and stuff, and there'll be like nuggets of truth in some of them, but it's like a little oversimplified on some things. Like they're talking about write-offs for certain types of cars, or they're talking about other like business deductions that I know are real things, but they're like a little bit oversimplified. And like advice from peers, listen, there's right and wrong ways to do some of this stuff that are just cut and dry, like legally. And there's people not doing them that just haven't been caught yet. So if you have I know a guy who has a consulting company that supplies consultants to New York State agencies. There's tons of those. There's thousands of those, right? Like even just in the capital region with all the state entities we have, there's tons of contractors. But one of the things that some of those firms sometimes try to do, hey, you win this contract, you can supply resources, you can bill hourly for them. You're like, hey, my margins are even better if I don't put them on as employees, but because then I don't have all these additional various costs. I'll just pay them as a 1099, great margins. That's fine until you get caught. Like I know guys been doing it for years. He wanted me to do some work with him. And I was like, I can't work with you, like, because you're not doing it right. And like he wanted me to help train a recruiter who was working for him. And I was like, listen, I got to stay away from this because it's just not, I can't teach someone to do this. It's not right. And, but with trying not to insult him, but he's like, I've been doing this for like 10 years. It's like making tons of money, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, you just haven't been caught yet. Because how many times, like, listen, you just read in the paper, somebody was embezzling money for like 10 years at a company and then they got caught. Do you think in those 10 years they were not breaking the law? No, they just got caught. So there's advice from peers that has to be qualified, right? So just because they're like, oh, you can totally do that because I've been doing it for a while, doesn't mean that that's actually what you can do. Also, automatically aligns incentives. Hey, we both have skin in the game, right? Like, okay, that's not exactly true, but it's true in some regards, but like what we're going to get into the next slide is that dishing out equity is very more complicated than it seems and difficult to unwind. Commission only reduces risk. Yeah, for you, but there's really not much incentive for someone who's commission only. Like in most cases, you're talking commission only, you're talking about salespeople. So number one, going back to my original point that in the early years, you're probably the main salesperson anyway. And if you were trying to do a startup and you're trying to not sell anything and your hope is to hire a salesperson that you pay commission only to push this thing for you, I don't think you should be a business owner because you're not going about it the right way, frankly. Like you don't belong being an entrepreneur. Like you were trying to do it in the most risk averse way to do something super risky, right? So commission only reduces risk. Yeah, it reduces risk for you, but there's like really not much incentive for them. Oh, but there's tons of upside. Yeah, but like who are you going to attract that's really going to work for commission only, who's going to be any good? Not to mention where their priorities lie, right? If you've got resources that work for your full-time, going back to full-time or part-time employees, you can dictate some things. You're paying them a salary, whether maybe they work for you 20 hours a week. There's still a level of commitment there. If they're just a straight commission only resource, they can do whatever the hell they want. They may or may not sell for you, and you really have no accountability. You don't know, like, how are you going to drive your business forward if that person really doesn't have a motivation to do it? And you're like, well, offer them a huge cut. Yeah, or they could do other stuff. We're all going to go for the lowest hanging fruit. And again, promising upside is strong enough. It depends. Upside, but like they also got to see that you're putting some risk in too. And that risk comes in the form of some kind of salary, some kind of like the message you're conveying when you want to do commission only is that like, I don't want to take any chances. I don't want to take any risk, but I would like you to. So models are not as simple as they seem, especially with equity, right? Like it's not just as simple as like we have some drinks, so I'm going to give you 3% of my company. I have seen really successful situations where there's an earn-in concept set up at a company where you bring somebody on board and you say with clear targets, hey, I can give you milestones that if you hit these milestones, whether they're financial milestones or other ones, I will allocate percentages of ownership to you as you hit those milestones. That's a great way to do it, right? Like I had, there was someone who is in the same industry as me who left the company she was at and ended up starting her own, but at one point was entertaining the possibility of working with my partner and I 15 years ago. And was like, I want to be an owner, like right out of the gate. And to her, it was very important to be an owner, like psychologically. She just wanted to be like, I don't care, it's 5%, I want to be an owner. And it's like, well, like, I get that, but like, call you a partner or whatever. But like, we'll do this earn-in where you here you hit these milestones, you sell this. If you can produce like that, I'll be happy to gradually give you like pieces of the company. We'll totally work something out, right? And it's again, you need to have like this is the kind of thing like you have to have the council of attorneys, et cetera. Like this is not a thing that Richard, I know you do a ton of startups. You probably see this kind of stuff come up all the time. And then obviously Kelly does too. Equity is super hard to unwind. Like just, careful who you hit your wagon to, right? Like, cause in the very early stages, like, listen, it's one thing if you're going to be partners, right? Be partners. I was just like, oh, I'm going to give you 10% to come work for me free. You want nothing wrong with like, hey, I worked with you a bunch in the past. I know you. I think it makes sense for us to start a business together. Boom. Now you're partners. Now your equity incentives are aligned, right? That's fine. But if you dish out like ownership and that level of commitment to like early hires without knowing a whole lot, I mean, how many hires don't work out? A lot of partnerships don't work out too. But just it's really risky to bring like the deeds to your house on a first date. Right. Like, I mean, this is like, so also that there's all sorts of like, it seemed all these solutions seem really simple on the surface, but there's all sorts of tax complications. There's legal there's attorneys have to be involved in both cases that there's the long tail of this is very complex. So, and again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to try to dive into it more deeply, but just commission only think about where's their commitment just from a practical standpoint, putting aside everything legal, right? And then equity, carefully handcuff yourself to early on. It's kind of my take on that. But also like, not just can you hire that way, but like, does this create new problems? Job postings are barely effective anyway, but especially with all the noise floating around and all sorts of AI tools that are not knocking AI. I'm just using AI in air quotes. It's not even really AI. It's just poor automation that has, as a job seeker, they're like, oh, it's so hard to find jobs. We'll apply to 1,000 jobs for you. And then employers that are frustrated by all these applications that aren't and then half the time the people don't even know they applied to this stuff. Like I've been on the other side of this for so many companies, and there's a reason there's 500 applicants when a job opens up. It's because you've got like systems that are appealing to like the fears and concerns of job seekers. They're like, oh, I need to get more exposure. I want to apply to more jobs. Oh, we'll save you time. We'll apply to jobs while you're in your sleep. And now there's just this bunch of mismatched information smacking into each other. So job postings as it is are challenging, but for early hires, it's really difficult to convey what you're trying to accomplish in a job post at this stage, right? Like you're sitting down, like this is why a lot of it comes from like your network. A lot of it comes from your advisors, your peers, other resources, maybe not them specifically, but the people they introduce you to, because you can sit down with those people, you could talk with them about what it is you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. You're probably going to have to shape this role together a little bit before you, like, it's fine if you come to the conversation with it not fully cooked, but by the time they hired, you want to make sure like there are things that are defined. But that kind of warm introduction and that kind of way the conversation starts is nearly impossible to like write a magic job posting that attracts that person and even gets you two talking. Does that kind of make sense? So that's why like these networks, incubators, you go to like Upstate Capital, you go to like all the different organizations, right? And those people are going to be like, I got somebody you got to talk to. That's where a lot of that comes from. And because you can actually communicate your vision and what you're trying to do, and they can communicate and also like a lot of it, and I'll talk about what helps appeal in like an early hire when you're trying to convey it. Like one part of it is like, they you hear your vision, they believe in it, right? They embrace the uncertainty, all that other stuff. You're not gonna be able to do that on Indeed. You're just not. When your business gets more mature and you have more defined roles, and like it's fine. And every now and then, listen, blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then, but don't base your business on that, right? Positioning the opportunity, right? So now you're having that conversation with them. Okay, maybe it could be learning, maybe it could be exposure, especially if they're early stage in their career, or if they come from another industry background that's complementary to what you're doing. And now this is a really exciting like pivot point for them. People love, because a lot of what I've done the last several years has been executive level hires. And so many people I talk to who are 15, 20, 25 years in their career are looking for like something they can apply all the stuff they already know to like something a little different, like a new challenge, something exciting. So this could be exposure to a new industry for a seasoned veteran. It could be just getting your career going for somebody who's more junior. The impact, right? Like what's the impact of what you're doing? Like if you really believe in what you're doing, even if you're like the most introverted person, if you're talking about something you know well and you believe in, like it comes through and people will like want to follow you. The opportunity could be a career acceleration for someone because maybe they're stuck where they're at. It's not progressing the way they'd like to. This could be something that jumps them into a different category. And even like, it's okay too to say, hey, listen, we don't have to be working together forever, right? Like if you work here for a few years and this helps you get farther and helps me get farther, we both got value out of it. That's okay, right? And you could be open about that and people appreciate it, right? Like, listen, if this works out for a few years, I got value, you got value, you're better off, I'm better off. Awesome, we all win, right? And then honesty about the uncertainty. You can't sugarcoat it, right? Like don't scare them off, but like don't sugarcoat it. Like, hey, it's risky. Here's the challenges that face us. In fact, if you can express those challenges to someone who you might be hiring, they'll probably have more confidence in you because they know that you're not like starry-eyed and naive. They know that you know what's ahead, or have a sense of what's ahead and are planning for it, right? Then they'll believe in your judgment skills and decision-making skills as a leader. They'll be like, okay, this person is like realistic, right? The other thing too is maybe this will scare some people off, but that's okay, right? Like employers often will be vague about like a job posting in order to try to attract more people, right? And that's a huge mistake because you actually want to be more specific because you want some people to be like, that's not for me. Because the people who will say that's definitely for me will identify with it. So you just want to be clear about that. What you look for. Okay, judgment skills over pedigree. Yes, it'd be nice if sometimes they have a degree from this place or that place. That's not bad. Don't throw them out because of that, but just that the one reason why you're hiring them. Like they have this type of degree from this type of institution, and like that just magically fills in all the blanks. It doesn't. Right? Don't get blinded by that. Don't get distracted by it. I'm not saying that shouldn't do that because a lot of times it makes sense. And they make decisions with incomplete information. All of us have different decision-making styles. Right? Some of us prefer to have as much information as possible before making a decision. Others are more comfortable with like, I know enough to proceed. And like one of my favorite sayings when I had employees was, this is the plan until the plan changes, right? Like we're going this way until let's say we're going somewhere else, but at least you got a direction, right? And if they're comfortable with like making judgment calls without all the info, not even just in business, but like in life, right? Like if you're talking through situations they've lived through and you can kind of tell like, okay, this person, has the same risk tolerance I do. Comfortable with their comfort level without structure. Some people will, on one end of the spectrum, will say, hey, how do you want me to do this? Other people on the other end of that same spectrum will say, what do you want me to do? What do you want done? Right? And everybody's somewhere in the middle, right? So some people will want guidance, and it's totally fine. Neither of these things are right or wrong. In fact, as you start to grow your organization and you have different types of jobs, those different types of people are essential for those different roles, right? But in the early stages, you kind of need to skew more towards the ones who don't need as much information for a couple of reasons. One, it's still greenfield. You're still figuring out what you're doing. Two, they're not going to get your time as much. Like realistically, it was you or you and a partner, and now you add one person. You don't have the bandwidth to be like fully train them. You just don't, right? So like they have to be able to be comfortable with that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with somebody who's kind of sitting there waiting for you to say like, what do I do next? One time I came back to the office. This was like 20 years ago. Why it's relevant. I was out, had some meetings, came back, and I think like the power was out, and I was like, "What's everybody up to?" Like, and they're like, "Oh, we're just waiting until you got back to see what you wanted us to do." And I was like, "Okay, what if you could have called me?" or something. So like you want the employees that aren't going to be like, well, my normal flow of what was supposed to happen got interrupted, and now I'm just going to kind of have to wait till I get further instruction. And see, the thing I say was 20 years ago because like our internet was a little bit earlier. Like if it was more recently, people were like, the Wi-Fi's out, and that would have been notified immediately. So you want bias to action. You want someone whose natural tendency is to like act, right? They're almost restless, right? Like their version of like at rest is like other people's version of busy, right? They need stuff to do. They're always looking for like the next problem to solve, not looking for the next problem to complain about, but looking for the next problem to solve. So, and then like a desire to build, right? Like you want someone who wants to like make something, right? Like it's not going to be completely their baby because they still work for you, but they're going to be a key part of things, right? People have a lot of pride in helping build something that like matters, right? Almost to the end, and we still got some room for questions. Let's make sure I don't get through these slides. So when you're interviewing them, I guess I could spend a whole day talking about types of interview questions to ask and stuff, but what you're listening for, right? Because a lot of times we ask interview questions, we don't even know what the hell we're looking for. People have these magic bullet questions where they're like, oh, I know everything I need to know. I know from the answer to that question. Yeah, okay, whatever. Or we ask some question that we don't even know like what answer we're looking for, which is problematic because like how were you effectively evaluating this person? You want to understand their past decision making and what the results were. And that could be, this is where like even with a junior hire and you want to assess the things I was talking about in the previous slide, you can determine all this even if they barely ever had any jobs, because all the other things that they were involved in, class projects, jobs that they had in the summer, this and that, life choices, et cetera, you can determine some of that from this. Like how do they make decisions, right? How do they handle uncertainty? What have they built from scratch, right? It could just be literally something they built. Like maybe they rebuilt a car with like one of their relatives or something like that. Or this tells you like this is a person who's inclined to take incomplete information and like do something with it, right? How do they think when like resources are limited? Are they resourceful, or are they kind of like, I need this, and this to like do my job? And if I don't have it, right? It doesn't come out that exact way, but you can get a sense of it too. The other thing you want to listen for that I didn't put on here is ownership. And you hear that when you ask about things that have gone wrong, you ask about projects where they went south. If they're talking about what they could have done differently, and they're saying, hey, there's a lot of factors, the stuff that I had control over, I could have done this differently in retrospect. Here's what I could have controlled. if all you hear is like, well, that boss was a jerk and this one was a jerk and this guy made a bad decision, or I was held up because I was waiting for this person, you're not hearing ownership, right? You really want someone who's got a sense of ownership. So similarly, like red flags, if you talk to someone who says they didn't give me enough training, they didn't give me enough resources, listen, that's fine for some jobs, right? Like, I'm not saying that's the case for all interviewing that, but the case for like one of your first people you want them running with you, you want them, again, you got to do what you have to do, and you're going to show them how to do the job you want them to do, but you're not going to have enough time to really be there and let them shadow you completely, right? So that person who says they didn't get enough training, didn't have enough resources, is going to say, like, they belong in a more mature organization. They belong in a more defined, structured role, right? Just because they belong in a bigger team, right? Like when I've hired for departments of like 1 or 2 people, you need a different type of person in that who's resourceful and goes out and finds answers to things. If you've got a team of like 7 or 8 people in the same function, it's much easier to take somebody totally green and spread them amongst those resources and get them trained up. So that's telling you that that's probably not going to work in your environment. Now, don't hold me on that forever, because someday you might have 20, 30, 40, 50 employees, and you should be giving training and you should be providing resources. Over reliance on tools and systems, like if they talk about, like, how you can tell if somebody just really knows like one system inside and out, or if they understand the underlying like workings of that type of system and could easily use a similar system. Like, let's say QuickBooks or some kind of software tool that you're using. Some people just know like what buttons to push. Other people understand what's behind the buttons and like why, and then they'll go use any other accounting software and they'll be like, oh, this is here, got it, okay, I'm good, right? I think I liken it to like, you can drive an automatic, push a button, push a pedal, hit another pedal. You have a better appreciation for when things go wrong if you know how to drive a stick, because you know how the gears work, and even though you're not using them in an automatic, you understand like what's happening beneath the surface, right? So if they rely on the tool or the system too much, then that might be a sign that they are not as resourceful. They're not going to literally say that's not my job. At least I hope not. But like you're gonna hear that, and it's gonna come through where they talk about like they were asked to do things that were like outside of their job description, or someone else should have done that thing. Again, lack of ownership, right? Oh, I'll wrap this up in just a minute. And unrealistic expectations about equity or upside. Like if they think that they're just gonna like strike it rich working for you, you're like, okay, listen, I hope we do, but like I just need to temper those expectations. A lot of your first hires are about leverage. So, but if you're hiring for delegation, that's when you're handing off tasks. You're not transferring decision-making authority, right? You just have a helper. Okay. You're still at day-to-day execution. You're creating dependency, not autonomy. You have someone that needs to be shown what to do, told what to do. You're handing them tasks. It's like your busy work, right? That's not a bad thing. You might need that, right? But just know the difference between the 2 types of hires. That person's going to want to wait for direction, because you are going to have like, you're delegating details, not authority. Right. So like you're going to want stuff done a certain way. So they're going to want to know, how do you want it done? But you're still a bottleneck. You're just also managing someone else's work now. And by the way, either one of these could be the right solution depending on what you have going on. If you're hiring for leverage, then you're trying to figure out what do they own, give them authority. You're no longer as involved in that function. You've got oversight in it, but you're not doing it. This is the stuff that frees you up. This is the stuff that starts to scale, right? And that changes the scope of your own role. Example being, I need someone to help follow up with customers, versus I need someone who owns the whole customer process, et cetera, and I just want to hand that off completely. So, but I want to leave a little time for questions, because I'm sure there'll be some more. But if you're trying to figure out like what decisions do I no longer need to make, this will tell you like, is this a delegation hire or a leverage hire? And again, I'm not advocating for one or the other. Just understand the difference, because maybe what you need first is a delegation hire, or maybe you want to jump right to that. Because, for example, I have a what you call a virtual assistant, but at this point, so many people are virtual. I think just he works for me the last several years in Venezuela. He's my right hand. That's totally a delegation hire. He just takes stuff off my plate that's like minutia that like I could do, but it saves me 20, 30 hours a week of work. If I showed at this point in time, it's just basically me and him and a couple interns. If I decided I was going to start having employees again, when I feel like, at the moment I got other stuff going on, but when I want to do that again, then I'm looking at leverage hires. Okay, because depending on where you're at and what you want to do with your business and how much work you want to take on, what you might want to get ahead of yourself. So I think, next week, next month is Deb, who's going to talk about a whole lot of HR stuff. But with that said, I have nothing further to say other than answering your questions. So I know that's one of the things all employers ask themselves all the time too, right? It's like, what if I lose some person to somebody else? I can't pay as much. I think with a hire like that, you want to lean more into like communicating the vision, communicating the impact, like why, even if this part-time job that you're whatever you're farming out to them, there are people who a lot of times when I hire for companies, even for full-time positions, the money isn't as big of a deal at a certain point. Like there's still minimums that need to be maintained, but like then it becomes about the work. And it becomes about how meaningful it is. And if they feel like they're like building something, if it feels like they're, part of something, if that matters to them, they'll probably weigh that against like just someone waving a few more bucks at them. If it matters to them, right? Like it has to, you know what I mean? Cause like it could be someone who that really does mean a lot to, or it could be someone who could take it or leave it, and that you can't control. But I think if there's a little bit more of there's a little more stickiness if they want to build something with you. And I was going to say too, like this leads me to another point I was going to make related to like hiring people too, like the early ones. You don't want to have an independent contractor because you're going to run into classification issues. So let's say you hire these two people. This is a good example of someone I want to cover. Ideally, you want to have them either be some kind of fractional resource that has their own business already so that they can pass like the independent contractor test. The other thing you could do, you could hire them as a W-2 employee, and you could use either a PEO, professional employer organization, or more likely an EOR, an employer of record. So what those two things are, like, so for example, I have a couple interns that work for me. I pay them $20 an hour. I have them employed through an EOR. And if you go like Google employer record service, there's a bunch of different services that do it. But just to give you an example, like I could pay them under the table and risk like misclassification issues, right? Because they wouldn't pass the litmus test for an independent contractor. But the other thing is like, I've had as many as almost upwards of 50 employees, and I know what workers' comp costs look like liability insurance. Like you need some basic liability insurance when you have a real basic LLC, but like as you have employees and other stuff going on, it grows. And some companies do this for segregation of risk too. They might have all their office employees on their payroll, but they might run higher risk categories under like a PEO or an EOR. So as soon as you hire employee number one, you need workers' comp. You need to change your liability insurance a little bit. You need to start filing quarterly tax ST54s. So you gotta make sure you don't miss any of those. There's a bunch of stuff. There's costs and and Deb will go into this in much detail. That doesn't make a lot of sense for like one person or even like a couple people, right? So like an EOR, like the one I use, and they're all pretty similar. I pay an intern $20 an hour, and they mark it up about 20% roughly. So I'm paying $24 an hour to that company who fully employs this person and protects me from employment risk, right? Now, that works really well for some part-time employees, maybe like what you're talking about. You could just put them on W-2, or listen, they might have an LLC already and they would prefer that you pay them that way. That's fine. But if you want to have that early employee or that intern and you want to pay them, I can suggest to you the one I use, I've had success with, but again, you can look them up. There's a bunch of really reputable companies that do that. A PEO is more likely to be a larger scale situation where you're going to have a bunch of your employees that are going to be, you have 200 employees, 50 of them in the office, 150 of them in the warehouse or shipping or production. I want to move those 150 into a PEO because I want to segregate risk. That's kind of more of a scale thing. EORs are really good. They'll do the onesie twosies. They'll take people like me. And then this person goes online, enters their time. Everything's usually like white labeled. It's got like your company logo on it and stuff like that, but they work for that company officially. So you're protected from employment risk. Now, that doesn't scale well. So you just want to think about there's a tipping point where that works really great for some part-time employees, maybe even like one-ish full-time employee, but you got to look at where that tipping point is of how much your additional insurances are going to cost and all the other things that you need to do, the cost of employment. At a certain point, one's going to pass the other. And then it really makes a lot of sense to have all that set up yourself if you've got like a few employees or even a couple of long-term employees. But in the meantime, that convenience that you're paying it's not bad, and it saves you a lot of risk. So if you do bring them on, that could be a way you could go. And that's something I wanted to bring up for everybody. There's the difference between that and like a temp agency. And this is why the markup's lower. So similar to if you use a temp agency to find you somebody and they employ them and that shelters you from risk, that's great. They cost a little more because they're in the business of, and I know because I used to run one, they're in the business of finding you someone and employing them for you. Which might be what you need sometimes because maybe you don't have the resources to go find somebody, right? And they're gonna have a heftier markup, 60%, 70%, right? Because there's the work that goes into that, plus there's the employment costs. The reason an EOR is going to be 20, 25% probably markup is that you bring them the person, and they're just handling literally the back office. So like when I onboarded my most recent intern, an MBA student at UAlbany, basically they just sent her, I said, when their system set up a new person, just plugged in her contact info, it fired off like an onboarding kit to her. She filled in her stuff, did all her things. Every week she goes in, enters her time, it sends me an email, I approve it, they send me an invoice, they ACH draft it. Great. So that's probably the key difference though between that and like a temp agency. So like mechanically they're still doing the same stuff from like an employment standpoint, but it's just a matter of like what service do you need? Anything else anyone's curious about? So you'll have a little bit more protection for like a business, and you can be in a contract with them that might require some like notice period where they're a consultant to you and as part of the agreement that you have with them and they meet the requirements for an independent contractor. They've got certificate insurance, they've got, proper whatever. You could, in an agreement there, business to business, you can agree to anything.
Correct.
Employment doesn't work that way though. So like employee, you can hedge it a lot by having some upfront conversations and being pretty clear about like, hey, I'd really like to, if you are going to find something else, I'd like to be able to like, have a notice period or like at least get me to this next milestone, and we can work it out. But you really can't bind them to it. Like they're still at will. They could still just quit at any point. You could let them go at any point. Excuse me. Well, like a consulting agreement between someone and you could agree to just about any criteria. You could have, there was an owner of a company I was talking to who was trying to fire their CEO. It's local. At some point you'll hear about it, but not yet. In his contract, he's got like a 90-day period. I forget what the exact term for it was, but essentially like at the point they want to let him know that he's done, like he's still there for 90 days, which is bonkers. It's wildly damaging. But again, like that's a different level. But you can agree with like a company like, hey, you would have to, if you enter this agreement together, this is how we bill each other, this is what the deliverables are. And you can also bill like flat amounts too. It doesn't have to be hourly, right? You could say, hey, I'm going to pay you this much to do like this work because they have control of when they do the work, how they do it, et cetera. You can still build in incentives too, by the way. Like we're talking about like commissions and stuff. Like it's not a bad idea to throw some incentives in there, or maybe for hitting milestones, or maybe there's not much you can do punitively to keep them, but there's things you can do positively to keep them, right? There are, instead of like penalties, you have incentives to stick around, right? Like, and I'm trying to think of a good way to articulate that. If you can describe a situation where instead of them losing something by leaving early, there's something they can gain by sticking around, then you got something to work with there. And you have like, now you're talking about like incentivizing them, really. Did I beat that to death, or is that pretty much all right? Good. Anybody? Yes. Okay, so commonly people will be like, okay, hey, I'm gonna pay this person X. We both agree to it, so it's fine. New York State or any state won't see it that way. There's a lot of like employment protections. So the independent contractor litmus test, which Deb will elaborate on because she knows it very well and deals with classification issues all the time. So classification, to take a step back, is a hot button for Department of Labor because it's a really good revenue stream. Because you're not, and it's either Department of Labor or is it probably maybe tax and finance. Essentially, like if you're not paying employment taxes, then they're going after you for like there's money that can be collected, right? So misclassification of employees is one of the things that frequently gets audited for because there's opportunity for fees there. So if you're going to be an independent contractor, you have to, as the independent contractor, have control over when you do the work within reason. Like the employer can be like, hey, I'm only open 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. You can't do this work at midnight on Tuesday. But like you can't be like, I need you there 9 to 2 Monday through Friday, right? So you can't define it that narrowly. If they depend on tools that you provide to do their work, if they depend on your direction, I mean, there's some general direction, but if like they need to take like all their instruction, direction, prioritization from you, they're using your tools, they're working a schedule you defined, they don't have other customers, right? So one thing that really helps make it like, and not every independent contractor will, but like if they do have more than one client, it really helps because then it becomes much clearer that you are not their primary source of income. The trial periods in terms of like your ability to like terminate them is the same no matter what, right? So like sometimes people are like, oh, I can let them go for, I just want to cover that just so it's clear for everybody. You may know already, but sometimes there's a misconception that if you have like a probationary period in your handbook that you can just let them go for like any reason whatsoever, it's fair game for the first 90 days. That is not accurate, right? That being said, like it is kind of a good way to like you can hold back certain things that they earn after the 90 days. Like maybe you want to have them, I wouldn't say benefits eligible because like you'd be out of your mind to wait 90 days for benefits because everyone else is going to make them wait maximum 30 days. So you're just hurting yourself. But there might be like certain perks or incentives that like kick in. Sometimes companies will be like, oh, like the first year, this is what our goals are, or the first 6 months, this is what our goals are. Like I would try to figure out what are your like 90-day goals, right? And maybe sit down and say, okay, hey, listen, it's a startup, that, there's some risk, there's some things we're trying to accomplish. Some of this is going to be kind of dynamic. Here's what I think looks like success in 90 days. Let's talk about whether or not you think that that's realistic. Let's talk through that, make sure it's something we can agree to. And let's agree that in 90 days, if we're not there, if I'm not happy, if you're not happy, like it may be time to part ways, right? You're not saying I'm going to fire you in 3 months if you don't hit your goals. You're just saying like, here's what I think it looked like and understand that this could change because all this is very dynamic. But just you're kind of laying the groundwork that we might have to have a conversation, not to cut you loose, but to at least redefine like what the goals are. And I think that's like a fair thing to bring up, somebody that like most people would respect. And it's a lot easier to have that conversation before you hire them than after. There are certain pools of skill sets that might be heavier on risk averse people, right? And they might be less likely to want to hitch their wagon to a startup, right? Is kind of what
That's a very good way to say it.
Okay. So, and I've noticed that too, like in some fields, more often than not, more of them are risk averse. And so then you're like, how do I track this person if they're probably not wired to like go the startup route? I'll say that there's still exceptions. I think some of it comes from like your pool might be smaller, but they're out there because in any like I spent a lot of time hiring in software, so that I know about, but then also even other fields like hiring in accounting or finance or other areas where people tend to be like a little bit more reserved, or even like attorneys for like different law firms. Those people do exist, and if you position the opportunity like very specifically, like they're either going to raise their hand or bow out, and there will be some that raise their hand. But I do think this is also where a lot of those networks that you leverage in the beginning become super important, because the ability to communicate that and also like the trust. So if there's someone that one of your advisor pool or kind of mentors or whatever can point you towards, their relationship with that person will, if they don't know you, will kind of inform how much trust they put in you. et cetera, right? So they might be more likely to take the leap because of some of those circumstances. They might be more likely to take the leap because they trust that person that introduced the two of you. They like what you're doing. They'll be attracted to the opportunity. I think that's the other reason why like the job posting thing doesn't work, because if you have a big community of people that are maybe more inherently risk averse, figuring out where's that one that would do this, because they're in there, is going to probably come from more personal introductions. It's probably going to come from your network. I hope that's a useful answer. I think that's, yeah, because I think that's the main way to get them. Like they're in there somewhere, but then you're like, okay, but how do I find them? And at this stage, I think that's where those personal introductions become super important. So like having a really good network of, we're very fortunate that in a lot of these startup environments, like the people that they draw to events, like when I used to go up Startup Tech Valley and stuff like that, all the events that both Richard and Kelly put on, you'd get this amazing pool of like, not everybody even realized that like, okay, there's students there, but there's like people who sold their companies, there's CEOs, there's capital sources, there's attorneys, and they have such rich networks that like the more of those people that you know and get to know, like they'll point you to that person because they probably know somebody who's like got the itch that just doesn't know who to connect with yet. That was a really long answer to a short question, but hopefully. Yeah, so it does take a little social engineering there too.